I'm Amber Hunt, and this is Accused, the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Andes. On the last episode...
He didn't get convicted?
No, he was
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I thought it was a closed case. My gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, my. Now I'm concerned. Oh, that's terrible.
I hate to tell you this, but they were certain there was no involvement at all. In fact, he had an alibi for where he was, which wasn't close to Cincinnati.
I left off last episode talking about Boyd Glasscock and his strange pincushion gift to Bob Young. Glasscock, for the past several years, has really intrigued some of the people trying to figure out who killed Beth Andes. The strange thing is, no one would have ever connected him to the case if he hadn't inserted himself into it, showing up at Bob's house and even talking to the neighbors whose phone Bob used to call police. As odd as it sounds, that's something that killers are known to do. You know that saying, he returned to the scene of the crime? Yeah, that was coined because criminals are known to keep watch over the havoc they wreak. There's an element of control at play for people like that. If they're part of the investigation, they might be able to control its outcome. When Glasscock visited Bob Young a few days after his arrest, he didn't just offer an ear and moral support, says Deb Leiden, the lawyer working with Beth's family.
He came into the house and told Bob Young a series of things, that he had theories about who murdered Beth, that he thought that Bob didn't really love Beth, that Bob was really in love with him, Boyd, and he had a number of things he was talking about, how he'd been in and out of mental wards, and that, anyway, that he'd had a lot of issues, and he, from what I could tell, came across as rather psychotic. He tried to present Bob Young with a gift, what he called a gift. And when Bob Young opened the gift, he saw that it was a pincushion, a red pincushion, which one would expect to find in a sewing kit. And Bob didn't know what to make of it at the time, but said, "You need to take this with you and you need to go."
Bob didn't think much about the pincushion, but when Leiden heard about it decades later, something clicked for her.
The significance to me is that it probably came from Beth's sewing kit, and that he was trying to show a sign of what he knew about the murder. I don't think Bob Young realized the significance of the pincushion, if there was any. I don't think the police did, or Bob's attorney or whatever. I think it just seemed very odd.
I agree it's odd, and yet I go back and forth on just how odd. One night I was chatting about the case to my husband, who's been pretty interested in this whole thing as it's unfolded. I like getting feedback from him because he doesn't think the same way I do, and in truth, he doesn't have the kind of borderline debilitating empathy I can sometimes have. When I told him about the pincushion, he shrugged it off. My husband is an artist, and he said he could see someone finding it appropriate to give me a gift of a paintbrush if something awful happened to him. My jaw about hit the floor. Even if you'd just been killed with art supplies? What kind of heartless creep would give a gift like that? And anyway, would they look like it had been dripped in blood? My husband shrugged, maybe. I asked Bonnie, Glasscock's relative, about the gift, and she was just as ambivalent.
Well, let's see. That's not something, for example, that I would consider giving someone. He saw things not in necessarily an ordinary perspective, and maybe that's the artsiness. You know, he was quite an artist. In knowing him, that it didn't surprise me, amaze me, or just kind of more of a matter of fact.
Regardless, Bob was unnerved by the visit. He wrote a lengthy letter about it for his lawyer, who in turn gave it to prosecutors. In it, he said that Glasscock asked him to lie on Bob's bed with him so they could talk about the case, Bob said he passed. That letter, or more precisely, the behavior described in the letter, is undeniably odd. Glasscock said he had visited the Candlewood Terrace apartments where Beth died and had even chatted with the men whose phone Bob had used to call police. He said he'd seen Bob working the previous summer at Village Center, that he'd watched him as he carried a bottle of wine across the store. He said he read the Miami University yearbook and learned that the football team had had a bad season in 1976. Glasscock said he knew why. He said Bob Young hadn't played well because Bob was in love with him. His mind wasn't on the game. Bob told him he was crazy and got his parents to help boot him out the door. Glasscock called back the next day, Bob wrote in the letter, but Bob wouldn't take the call. In the case file, there's a notation that indicates a detective talked to Glasscock at some point after this visit. It implies that Glasscock was standoffish. Asked to give a formal statement, he reportedly said he'd think about it, though it appears he never did. Glasscock and some relatives of his did offer up an alibi for December 28th.
He said he was at a cousin's house in Lexington, Kentucky, at the time of the murder.
A police note indicates a cousin said that several family members went to the ice capades the night of the murder. I searched through old Lexington papers and did find that the ice capades were in town from December 28th through the 31st. It's impossible to confirm that the Glasscock clan went that first night, of course. According to the ads, that night was earmarked and sold out as a family night sponsored by the local newspaper. A few years ago, Lydon called that cousin of Glasscock's who reportedly had told police about the ice capades. Too much time had passed, and she couldn't remember 1978 specifically anymore for Lydon. Bonnie, the relative I spoke to, said the family tried time and again to get Glasscock help, but he was too proud to accept it, maybe too sick to realize he even needed it.
We tried everything possible to get him help.
And on top of that, he was whip smart and very good at talking his way out of confrontations. Mental illness is, of course, a tricky subject. On one hand, we hear it tossed around time and again every time someone is accused of doing anything violent. And it's hard to argue that someone willing to take the life of another human being isn't mentally ill. But plenty of people with mental problems never get violent. The American Psychological Association published research in 2014 that said in a study of crimes committed by people with serious mental disorders, only 7.5% were directly related to symptoms of mental illness. Gillian Peterson, the lead researcher, said at the time, quote, "When we hear about crimes committed by people with mental illness, they tend to be big headline-making crimes, so they get stuck in people's heads. The vast majority of people with mental illness are not violent, not criminal, and not dangerous," end quote. Okay, but that's the vast majority. What if Glasscock's an anomaly? There's another element here, too. Glasscock was gay. Lydon looks at the way Beth was killed. No apparent sexual assault with stab wounds to her breasts. There's even what appeared to be a stab wound to her labia. And she wonders, was this maybe an assault on her very sexuality? Could that be a sign that the crime was committed by a possibly repressed gay man? Oxford Lieutenant Robinson is guarded in how much he talks about his suspicions, but I caught that he points to Glasscock without using names.
I think there's three possibilities, and I would give the greater weight of one of the three that person's dead.
So keeping...
we can't find that answer. I
Right.
don't know, but...
what about... Can you tell me why you lean toward him then?
A lot of it is the psychological profile.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you've seen the photos from the scene.
I have, yeah.
It's brutal. This thing was very brutal.
It was.
And it was not. This was not a oops, you walked in on me, stealing your television set, or you walked in on me trying to steal your jewelry. This was somebody that had intentions to prove a point, and to say you're not going to interfere with my life again.
I researched these psychological profiles and agree with that thought to a point. The fact is, though, that of the many identified serial killers, it's rare for one who's gay or bisexual to kill the opposite gender. Most follow the Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy mold. They tend to target young men. That doesn't prove a thing, of course, but it is one of the reasons that the forensic experts I've talked to don't really get excited about Glasscock as a suspect. I asked former FBI agent Dan Vogel if Glasscock seemed like a fit in his opinion.
I think if he was mentally ill, and if in fact, let's assume that he was mentally ill, that would have shown up at the crime scene. That the personalities, the killers leave their personality at the crime scene. So I think we would have seen some bizarre, strange things, other bizarre, strange things at the crime scene. I'm not saying that he's not a suspect, but I'm saying that I would look at other people a lot more strongly, like the supervisor, her supervisor. I would want to do a 360 degree on him to find out what his background is, and does he have a criminal record, and what is he like? Does he have a violent temper?
This brings us to the third character highlighted by Robinson in the VDOC presentation we discussed in an earlier episode, Beth's boss. By all accounts, Beth seemed to like her job, which wasn't a far cry from the high school gig she had at Milk and Honey in Canton. Beth and Hallie, the college roommates, worked together there. The Red Ox was a delicatessen with two sides to it. One side with a drive-through that sold alcohol, and another side that was a deli. Beth and Hallie worked on the deli side.
We ate more sandwiches that year than probably sold. So we would serve behind the counter, slicing meat, making sandwiches, spooning salads, and so on and so forth. And then our manager worked on the other side, which was the drive-thru.
The manager's name was Robert Buzz Call. That's C-A-U-L. We've mentioned him before because the day after Beth died, he called police to tell them about the last time he'd seen Beth, which was at her apartment the night before she died. Hallie remembers Buzz as being much older than she and Beth and was surprised to learn recently that he actually was only a few years older than they were. He was what the college kids called a townie, someone who lived in town permanently, not just for college. In fact, he stayed in Oxford several years after the murder, according to his friends. Call reached out to Oxford police December 29th and offered to write a statement describing his last encounter with Beth for Officer Roger Brooks. That's the same officer who had given Beth a speeding ticket the morning before she died. In the statement, Call wrote that he'd gone to Beth's apartment to talk and party. He arrived around 9 p.m. and left between 11:15 and 11:30. Quote, "We smoked a couple of joints and I had some wine and she drank some Pepsi. Conversation was the usual in so much as, how was Christmas? How long are you in town for? What are you doing for New Year's? Have you found an apartment yet?" End quote. He described what Beth wore that night, a gray sweater and a pair of blue jeans, clothing that I later noticed was actually featured in the crime scene photos. The sweater, in fact, had been wrapped around the fatal scissors, apparently in an attempt to keep fingerprints off of it. Call said that Beth complained about her door being left unlocked, and he suggested that she complain officially about it in the morning. Quote, "We watched the movie on TV and talked, and while we talked, she did some packing," end quote. He went on to praise Beth's work ethic. She was friendly and intelligent, he said, with a highly visible post serving customers and a lot of friends. And he couldn't imagine any reason why someone would want to kill her. Call gave that statement about noon on December 29th, the day after Beth died. The time is jotted in the upper right corner of the paper. 3.5 hours later, he contacted police again. He added that after he left Beth's place, around 11:15 or 11:30, she went to his apartment to use his phone. This second written statement says that Beth showed up about 10 to 15 minutes after he had left. She asked to place a collect call to her parents, he said. After parents, he wrote in parentheses, "I assume." The call didn't go through at first, he said, so she hung out for about 10 minutes, made the call again, and then left his apartment. Call doesn't mention his own whereabouts the night Beth died in his first two statements. Call's written statements did catch the attention of Oxford Lieutenant Richard McVeigh, and in an inter-office memo dated January 2nd, 1979, McVeigh wrote to Chief Statham about chatting with Call again. The memo reads, quote, "Since he was with the victim Wednesday night in a somewhat romantic setting, parentheses, he advised no sexual intercourse, end parentheses, I feel a polygraph would be in order. I discussed this with him, and he stated he'd take one just as soon as we could set it up." End quote. McVeigh goes on to note that he wondered if maybe Beth and her boss had made out, and maybe she told Bob Young about it. Maybe that's what set Bob off. 6 days later, Detective Baird followed up on this thought. Instead of talking to Call, he talked to Call's lawyer, identified as an Athens man named Thomas Hodson. Baird wrote in the report that he told Hodson that Call should submit to a polygraph and provide his fingerprints straight away. The detective also told Hodson that he'd like Call to provide a written statement explaining where he was December 28th, the night that Beth died. Call's fingerprints indeed are in the case file, but there's nothing further about him anywhere. There's no alibi or notation about any polygraph that he might have taken. He didn't testify during the trial, and neither did R.J. Villela, the one guy among Beth's friends who told police that Bob did indeed have a temper. Neither was called to the witness stand to bolster the police's theory on motive. I found Buzz Call's lawyer, Thomas Hodson. His name had been misspelled in Baird's report, but the phone numbers matched up, and he confirmed to me that he vaguely remembers Buzz Call, but he couldn't remember the case or say whether he'd represented anyone who had taken a polygraph in relation to it. My best bet was clearly going to be reaching Buzz Call. So I tracked him down in Athens, Ohio, home of Ohio University toward the eastern edge of the state, where an online profile says he works as a substitute teacher. I left a message saying that I was aiming to write about Beth's case, so I was trying to piece together some things from people who knew her. When he called me back in early February, he didn't sound terribly thrilled to hear from me.
I'm in the middle of some taxes, but I can give you a couple of minutes, ma'am.
Okay, I understand. All right, well, what do you remember about her?
From what I can remember, again, it's been a long time ago, good worker, easygoing person.
So was she friendly? Was she stern? I mean, if you were to describe what you recall of her personality, how would you summarize it?
Well, like I said, she was a good worker and she was easygoing, but we weren't really friends from outside of work. We knew who each other was. That was about it.
Oh, okay. And you spent a couple hours with her the night before, though, right?
Yes, I did.
What was that about?
Just
hanging out.
A bit about her move and everything. That was it. I was surprised that she asked me to come over.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So what did she talk about? Was she excited about the move? Was she nervous?
Don't remember one way or the other, ma'am.
Really? She died the next day. I would think that kind of would stick.
I had been eager to hear what Beth's frame of mind was Wednesday night. I thought it might give me some insight into Thursday. She was home alone, so Call was the only person I knew about who might be able to shed some light on this. I was surprised he said he didn't remember. Isn't that the kind of thing you'd replay over and over in your mind? She died in that apartment the very next day. McVeigh described their Wednesday encounter as romantic. I certainly can't remember every detail of every encounter I've ever had, but the ones connected to something traumatic, well, they tend to stick with me.
Well, ma'am, how many years ago did you say it was?
No, I know. 37, but it's, How old were you back then?
What was your last name again, Amber?
Hunt, H-U-N-T.
What?
H-U-N-T. I'm a reporter with the Enquirer.
Okay.
Are you uncomfortable talking with me?
Well, I don't have much more time. I need to get back to work, but this is very odd after 37 years for this to be spoken about again. It was not a good time for their family or anybody else that knew Beth.
I feel I should say here that plenty of people don't like talking to reporters, so reluctance is nothing new for me to get. I don't know what kinds of experiences he's had with journalists in the past. It could be that he's not a fan. When I called him, I hadn't yet contacted the forensic interrogator who would coach me on the Steve Green chat, but I tried to keep my tone open and friendly. I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I knew that he could decide to hang up on me at any time.
Do you remember if police talked to you about, theories or anything?
About what?
Any of their theories? I mean, I know they zeroed in on the boyfriend pretty quickly. Did you know Bob Young?
Very little bit, other than maybe the football, and that. Then I found out that Beth was going out with him.
Okay, so it's not like he would come in and see her while she was at work or something.
Well, I very seldom was there at that time because I typically worked days and she typically worked evenings.
Okay.
And so if Bob came in to see her, I would not have known that.
Okay.
And yes, the police did talk to me. I even called them the next day to say they wanted to talk to me because I had seen her the night before. So I contacted them originally.
You had a lawyer at the time, right?
At that time, no.
I knew this wasn't accurate, but I didn't argue.
So part of what I'm looking at is, how much they investigated the crime when it happened. Did they have you fill out a statement? Did they ask you to take a lie detector test? Did they rule you out? You know what I mean? And I'm sorry because I know how crazy that is, but I'm trying to get a sense for how thorough the police were.
They ruled me out, ma'am.
Right. So through alibi, or how did they do that?
Through alibi and lie detector.
That has to be a strange experience to go through.
Yes, it is. Even stranger to talk about it 37 years later.
Well, I'm not trying to, it's...
The police don't have any of this information, ma'am? Does it freedom of act or whatever that is to get
Freedom of Information Act? Yeah, but there's a mention in there about a lie detector, but there's no results. So I didn't know if you took it or
So
if
you knew I took a lie detector test before you asked me about it?
No, I knew that they were asking people to, but I don't know that they followed through on it.
So there was nothing about who did or did not take a lie detector test then?
Right. I don't know if you did or didn't.
Well, you do now.
Do you remember what that was like?
Very nervous, man. Have you ever been hooked up to a lie detector?
I have been for a story. It's not the same, though.
No, it is not. Not for something like that. No.
Do you remember who administered it?
I do not.
Do you remember what they told you about it? And I'm coming from a place, by the way, I'm well aware that, number one, they tell people that they fail when they don't, and number two, that they're not reliable, and that's why they're not allowed in court. So, but did they tell you one way or the other what they determined?
That I was not the person that did that?
Yeah. I can understand that you're reticent, and you don't know me, and you don't know why I'm doing it. But I'm not. I'm just trying to tell a story about a woman whose murder still isn't officially solved, anyway.
How did you come upon this story to begin with?
The family's lawyer reached out, said, it might be an interesting case to look at, and it is. Mostly because
interesting is not a word I would use for a murder, ma'am.
I think that's fair, and that's probably fair. I don't mean to diminish it.
Okay. Are there any other questions before I get back, ma'am?
Well, can I talk to you further about, because
No, we've been on the phone, 10 minutes or so now? I think that's long enough.
Why are you angry with me?
Why do you perceive that I'm angry, ma'am? Has my voice changed in any way, shape, or form since we started talking?
No, it's been confrontational the whole time.
Okay, I guess I could say the same about you. Now that you're saying something like this, it makes me even more nervous. So may I have who your boss is at Cincinnati Enquirer?
Yeah, absolutely. My boss is Peter, Bhatia.
I don't call Peter often. If I need him, I usually just walk into his office. So I legitimately had to search online for his phone number. While doing so, I did what I'm trained to do as a reporter. I kept asking questions. I figured I was losing him anyway, so I might as well go for broke.
So the police records indicate you had a crush on her? Did you have a crush on Beth?
That would be incorrect, ma'am.
That's
that
incorrect?
Would be incorrect, and you were going to give me the number for your boss?
I gave him the phone number. He thanked me and hung up, and then called my boss to confirm that I worked for the paper but provided no context for the question. I wrote Buzz a letter after our chat, assuring him that I simply wanted to learn about Beth as a person, and invited him to call me back. He never did. Soon after this call, my producer, Amanda, and I interviewed Hallie Chapman, married name Macaulay, in person with her husband, Rich. I asked her about her former boss. It was Hallie who told police back in 1978 that Buzz had a terrific crush on Beth. It's jotted on one of the police reports, almost as an aside. I assumed she had told them that after learning he had spent time at Beth's apartment Wednesday night. That turned out not to be the case. Here's Hallie talking about Call.
We thought of him more as a townie. And he seemed, he was very interested in Beth. Asked personal questions about her, especially as her relationship with Bob was unfolding, and so you and Bob going out, or how Bob, your football player friend. I remember his comments being just enough to make us uncomfortable. And we would talk about that, and it was a very short walk home for us from the Red Ox to our home on Ardmore.
That's the apartment Beth shared with several girls until August, when she moved into Candlewood.
And there was an agreement between the two of us that if we weren't walking home together, that we would have someone walk home with us. The antenna for us, and the reason why I told this to the police, was he was someone that we did not feel comfortable being left alone with, especially when he was there. Again, we didn't always work together, but in the deli there were always two. And at closing time, I would say to her, do you have someone to walk you home? Many times Bob would pick her up. Or she would say to me, do you want me to swing by and walk home with you? We had concerns about him.
Were they real concerns, or were they, haha, creepy old guy, and I'm a flighty college kid?
Yeah,
because I was there too,
Yeah. I guess I would describe it as just enough to allow us to say, if Buzz is there, and he was, I don't remember him not being there, why don't I swing by and walk home with you? But even more so when she was killed. And then it went, for me, away from kind of a creepy guy, let me walk you home, to has anybody talked to him?
Buzz sounded pretty firm when I asked about a crush on Beth, so I pushed Hallie hard about why she thought he had one. She described him as flirtatious and said he would leave his post on the booze side of the business to hang out in the deli when Beth was there.
It was kind of the, hey, good looking, or man, you're looking good today, kind of compliments or comments, or what are you doing after? There was, again, reference to Bob. I bet you're going out with your big football player boyfriend tonight. He was very interested in what we were doing after hours. I don't remember him specifically asking her for a date, but certainly was interested in spending some time after work.
Beth wasn't shy about telling him to back off, Hallie said. She'd say, I think I heard the bell ring, I think you have a customer, to shoo him back to his side of the business.
We made it known to him. Remember, he was our boss. So we weren't quite rude, but we made it known to him, and certainly Beth said that she was not interested romantically in him.
I asked Hallie and Rich, her husband, about the Wednesday visit. I asked as though they'd know what I was talking about, but it soon became clear they didn't.
Do you know that he told police that he was at her apartment Wednesday night?
No, I didn't know that. So I didn't know that Buzz was there.
Does it make sense that he would have been at her apartment Wednesday night?
Yes.
Why?
So that Buzz would have been at her apartment because he was very interested in her. So.
But would it have made sense that she let him in?
Oh, no. No. It would make sense to me that he would want to be there. It would not make sense to me that Beth would have invited that.
Hallie, I think I am aware of something in the case file that I don't think you're aware of.
Could be.
Is this ringing any bells at all? So,
Of Buzz being there?
yeah.
No.
I'll answer that. For me, not at all. The maintenance person, yes.
On Thursday.
On Thursday, that was always one of the two people that we thought, Buzz being one because of what we just talked about, and then the maintenance guy because of being in the building in her apartment. I wasn't aware of that.
I wasn't aware of that. Mm-hmm.
Buzz's statement to police is that he had spent some time at the apartment Wednesday, that it was a semi-romantic setting, that they spent a couple hours together, but that there was no sex, but it's implied maybe there was making out. Does any of this make sense to you?
No, it does not. In fact, it's very frightening to me. It adds up from what I had observed in him lusting after her. Again, a lack of a better word, but it does not make sense that Beth would have welcomed those advances.
Give me a second, because I thought you knew this part. So I'm not trying to do anything where I'm surprising you. It's not my style, but I just assumed Debbie had talked. At minimum, Debbie had talked to you guys. Imagine the statement is that Beth invites him over. Is there any chance in hell that would have happened, that she would have spent time with him, and that she wouldn't have told you on Thursday?
No. So again, on Thursday, I know she didn't mention Buzz on Thursday. And I wonder if, it could have been I forgot, but it was such a thing between us that I would have thought that she would have mentioned it, because she was, mentioning again her disappointment in this facilities person. So I'm at a loss as to whether or not that could have occurred. If it did, you would think that she would have mentioned it to me.
Hallie wasn't the only one unaware that Call reportedly spent Wednesday evening alone with Beth. Bob Young said he didn't remember that either.
I don't think he ever was at the apartment. At least, I don't know that he was ever there.
And they never told you that he said he was there the night before?
No. I don't remember that.
Okay.
So no, I don't think I would have, that would enforce my thought of him doing it, but I don't remember that. And, but I just thought he was, I don't know, everyone develops an opinion. I thought he was a little bit strange, and I knew he liked her a lot, but I didn't know she hung out with him the night before, no.
Sue Parmalee didn't remember this detail either. Like Bob and Hallie, she talked with Beth the day Beth died, and there was no mention of having hung out with Buzz the night before.
Wow. Did that sound familiar at all?
That. No. I didn't know that. See, I wasn't allowed to hear any of the other testimony because I was also a witness,
yeah,
during the
this
trial.
Wasn't in the trial, just so you know.
I'm going to respond that they weren't like friends that hung out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they were friendly, but she didn't just hang out with him, to my recollection.
As far as you know, they weren't the hang out, drink wine, smoke pot kind of friendship.
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah. Why did you say that you thought he should be talked to more?
Because I guess he was somebody that rose to my suspicion. Because I thought he liked Beth. I think he wanted more from her.
So imagine you've got a coworker. Let's say, for the sake of argument, you don't have a crush on this coworker. He's just someone you work with. Imagine he invites you over to his apartment to hang out one night, and you go over and smoke some pot and hang out and talk about the future. Imagine that you learn the very next night he was killed. murdered in the apartment where you had just hung out. Hell, you're asked to take a polygraph about the death. Do you think you'd remember the encounter? Would it stick? Would you tell your friends? I've shared this phone conversation with several experts, including nationally renowned polygraphers and profilers. Retired FBI agent Dan Vogel offered one unsettling theory.
I find that extremely interesting. If, in fact, he claims that he was in her apartment the day before for 2 or 3 hours, which I find that hard to believe because I can't imagine why she would be wasting all this time with him if they didn't have any kind of a relationship. If you plan to go into that apartment and do something to her, you need to be able to explain why your DNA is found in that apartment and your fingerprints. And the way you do that is you say, oh yeah, I was there the day before, so you'll find my fingerprints in there. That's
right.
Why. Now, whether he was or not, I don't know, but I assume that he wasn't. And that would be a motivation for setting up something to do with her. So again,
can you expand on why you think that it's not likely that he was over? Why is that your gut?
It doesn't make any sense to me that she would be spending that much time with him. This doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay.
I mean, she's got a boyfriend. She's got, they're planning on getting married probably if they can work out this work situation. So what in the heck is she doing? It doesn't make any sense. Unless he was there, unless he just wouldn't leave, and she couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
Vogel said that if he'd been heading this investigation, Bob Young would not have been his only focus. He would have talked with Buzz Call, with Stephen Green, with other maintenance workers, and with Boyd Glasscock, at least to learn what they knew.
And so by the end of the day, we've got probably 10 or 12 people on the suspect list that we haven't even looked at because we've already decided, well, this is what's happened. And so, we've made an arrest, we've solved the case, and, good for us. But jury didn't buy it.
I did more research, and Buzz has an interesting background. He appeared once in a brochure as a Big Brother volunteer, though the agency wouldn't confirm that to me, citing privacy reasons. He graduated with a bachelor's and then a master's from Miami University, according to their registrar. Buzz Call's father, David Call, was a well-known and highly respected psychiatrist at the Athens Mental Health Center. He treated Billy Milligan, a serial rapist who made headlines in 1977 for successfully using a diagnosis of multiple personality disorder to be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of going to prison, Milligan was sent to a hospital to be treated by the elder Call. The month that Beth Andes was killed, Dr. Call was working to merge Milligan's many personalities into one. It's an interesting case. I also learned that the doctor lived with his children on the hospital grounds because it gave him housing. Steve Call, Buzz's brother, wrote about that experience in a submission for a book called Stories of Medicine by Dr. Gary E. Cordingley. In it, he described how the kids played basketball and softball with the patients and considered them friends. I found excerpts of this book online. There were scary moments, Steve Call wrote, but mostly they had a blast. It sounds like an unusual setting, but Steve Call says he did more traditional things too, like becoming an Eagle Scout while living on the hospital grounds from 1965 to 1971. I've tracked down others who knew Buzz Call, and many of them said he is a caring and stand-up guy. Still, they didn't know about the Wednesday encounter either.
Did Buzz ever mention that he spent time with her the night before she died?
No.
That's R.J. Villela, the high school friend of Beth's who had a crush on her. He told me that he knew Call really well because they stayed friends 3 or 4 years after Beth died. Despite both being directly connected to this headline-making tragedy, Buzz apparently never mentioned that he had spent time with one of RJ's best friends the night before she died, or that he had taken a polygraph because of it. In a strange coincidence, Al Gerard, the guy who was at the movies with maintenance man Steve Green the night Beth died, also knew Buzz Call. They met at a restaurant a few years after the death, around the time the civil suit would have been going to trial. Gerard said Call was his boss, and they grew to be friends, too. He said Call never mentioned that an employee had been murdered.
He could be sort of real stinker of a manager, but I just let that run off my back. 99% of the people did. And you just go, damn it, nobody ever listens to me. Good-naturedly.
So kind of, I mean, that's sort of a harmless vibe then, like, you know.
Yeah, it's sort of like his bark is worse than his bite type of thing.
Okay.
Huh, I didn't know that.
And how he treated his female employees well?
Yeah.
Never any complaints about how he came across to them? Okay.
I really wanted to talk to a woman who knew and worked for Call to hear the female perspective on him. So I called Sandy Caldwell. She met Buzz in the early 80s when he opened a bar called Light Horse Harry Lee's in Oxford. So this was a few years after Beth's murder. Sandy's been friends with Call ever since and assured me there's no way he did anything sinister.
There's not enough ethically that I can say good about Buzz. He is a person that is one of my, frankly, at this point, still one of my most trusted friends. And while he may socialize with workers, there would have been, there's nothing he would have had to do with foul play. I mean, I would say sincerely from the bottom of my heart that there's nothing that I would say would make him a point person of interest, because he was the kind of guy that, you know, we all knew, and we often would all, part of the bar mentality when you're working in that environment is that you all go to somebody's place and drink after work, you know, to wind down. So I suspect that that's probably why he was with her the night before, because that's kind of what we all did with each other, at least in the 80s, and I'm presuming the same happened in the, you know, in the 70s.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay. No, I'm really happy because
I mean, again, ethically, he's not at all somebody that would be even remotely capable of doing anything. I mean, even morally, he's got a very strong moral line. So in terms of even fooling around with an employee, no, he wouldn't do that. He draws his lines ethically and integrity around his position. He's always been that way, which is one of the many reasons we love him. If anything, we would give him crap a lot of times because he was always somebody that would go by the rules, and we would always be the ones, you know, drinking on the clock and doing all the things that you weren't supposed to be doing, but that you often did because it was college.
But Sandy did say one more thing. She volunteered that Pat Baird, the lead detective on Beth's case, was a good friend of Buzz's.
If Pat knows Buzz really well, I mean, we all knew each other. Pat used to come drink at Larry Moon's and Light Horse Harry Lee's.
Oh, Pat knows Buzz well?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, he knows.
I didn't know because...
No, but he knows Buzz very well because those guys all used to golf together and stuff. And again, Pat, being the detective, he used to come after shift and drink at our bar, and Buzz was my boss. Al was one of my coworkers. So again, the weird little circle of connections is all there. So yeah, because I can remember Pat telling me about, I was heading the ERA campaign at the time for our campus, and Pat would come and bemoan to me about all of the campus rapes and how many football players were doing horrific things and never getting any kind of reprimands for it. So, yeah, Pat knows Buzz really, really well as well. Now, I don't know that they stay in touch, but I know that Pat and Buzz were good friends back in the 80s for sure.
There may be a few ways to read this. Let's go with the least concerning. If Call and Baird were friends, maybe this explains why Call calls police himself at noon the day after Beth is killed to give a voluntary statement. Maybe he's familiar enough with police procedures because his buddy is a detective, so he offers up what he knows. But there are still some unanswered questions, like why it took Call 3 hours to call back with the additional information that Beth came to his house at nearly midnight to use his phone to call home. Why didn't he say that the first time? Why do none of Beth's family and friends remember receiving that phone call? Why is there no mention of Call's alibi anywhere in the case file? Everyone else was asked for an alibi, but not Buzz Call. And I noticed a strange note Detective Baird made when he wrote about talking with Call's lawyer. In all capital letters, Baird said he advised the lawyer that Buzz Call was not a suspect in the case. Why did he feel the need to do that and to note it in all caps? Call hasn't gotten back to me since demanding my boss's phone number, and if you'll remember Baird...
I'm not going there. I've been retired since '96.
He wouldn't talk to me at all. So these questions remain unanswered for me. Hallie made two things clear. First, she thinks Buzz Call should have been more thoroughly investigated in this case, and at minimum should be properly interviewed today. She'd like to know why no one has corroborated that he hung out with Beth the day before the murder, or that he took and passed a polygraph. She'd like to know where he was December 28th, and she doesn't understand why he's the only person questioned who doesn't seem to have his alibi noted in the file. But Hallie also made it clear that she's not pointing fingers.
I believe that Buzz, and again, he's certainly as deserving as the rest of us of being able to tell his story. We certainly don't want to insinuate any guilt. We've had enough of this, of that, with this case. I feel very strongly that he should have been interviewed.
If you had trouble hearing her, she said we've had enough false accusations in this case, so that's not her goal. She just wants her former boss to be interviewed. Next time on Accused.
At least 75% of serial killers, all known serial killers, make their appearance approximately between 1970 and 2000, in that 30-year period.
This is a special project from the Cincinnati Enquirer, narrated by Amber Hunt, produced by Amanda Rossman, edited by Amy Wilson, and engineered by Stephen Baum at Cincinnati Public Radio. Music was composed by Andrew Higley. To look at case documents, photos, videos, and more, visit cincinnati.com/accusedpodcast.